The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, addressed in my own handwriting from 47 years ago. Inside was a letter I'd written to myself at 25, sealed and forgotten in a box my late wife Emma had kept in our attic. The instructions on the outside read, "Open when you're alone and wondering who you really are." I almost threw it away. At 72, 3 years after losing Emma to cancer, the last thing I needed was some naive young man's advice about life. But curiosity won, and I opened it with shaking hands. Dear future me, I hope by the time you read this, you've lived an extraordinary life. I hope you've traveled, created something beautiful, learned to play guitar, and never stopped wondering about the world. Most of all, I hope you remember what it feels like to be completely yourself, not what others expect you to be. Just you. Don't forget to dream, even when you're old, especially when you're old. Love, 25-year-old David. I sat in Emma's kitchen, now just my kitchen, and realized with stunning clarity that I had forgotten. For 47 years, I'd been David the husband, David the father, David the accountant, David the caregiver, but David the dreamer, David the adventurer. David the man who once stayed up all night reading Kerouac and planning road trips to nowhere. That man had been buried under decades of beautiful, necessary, life-consuming responsibility. And now, for the first time since I was 25, I had the chance to find him again. This is the story of how learning to live alone at 72 didn't just save my life. It gave me back the life I'd forgotten I wanted to live. Discovery 1. Freedom that feels like flying. The first time I ate ice cream for breakfast, I felt like a criminal. Emma would have gently suggested fruit and yogurt, something more appropriate for a man your age. But Emma was gone, and there I was at 7 a.m. with a bowl of chocolate chip ice cream, watching the sunrise through my kitchen window. And something magical happened. I remembered being 8 years old, sneaking into my grandmother's kitchen on summer mornings, sharing secret ice cream breakfasts while she told me stories about her adventures as a young woman in New York City. The best adventures, she used to whisper, happen when nobody's watching. That's when I understood that freedom at 72 doesn't mean doing whatever you want. It means rediscovering what you actually want. Often for the first time in decades, within a month. I'd bought the motorcycle I'd dreamed about for 40 years. Emma had always been terrified of motorcycles, and I'd never pushed it. But now, wearing a leather jacket that made me feel like James Dean's grandfather, I took my first solo ride to the coast, standing on the beach, helmet in hand, watching waves crash against rocks I'd driven past in cars for decades. I felt something I hadn't experienced since I was young, the intoxicating rush of being completely, authentically myself. My neighbor Carl, 68, watched this transformation with amusement after his wife moved to memory care. Carl had made his own discoveries. Last week I ate Chinese takeout for dinner 4 nights in a row. He confided with a grin, not because I had to, but because I could. Sometimes freedom looks like rebellion, but it feels like coming home. Discovery 2. Silence as sacred space. The house felt haunted at first, not by Emma's ghost, but by the echo of 47 years of shared life. Every room held conversations, arguments, laughter, tears. The silence seemed to amplify everything we'd never said and everything we'd said too often. But slowly, something shifted. The silence stopped feeling empty and started feeling expectant, like it was waiting for something new to fill it. I started talking to myself, not the muttering of a lonely old man, but actual conversations. I'd debate the morning news out loud, narrate my cooking experiments, even argue with characters in the books I was reading. And for the first time in years, I heard my own voice without filtering it through someone else's needs or reactions. The breakthrough came on a particularly difficult day, Emma's birthday, 4 months after her death. Instead of filling the silence with television or calling the kids, I sat in my living room and let the grief breathe. I told stories to the empty air about our first date, our wedding day, the night our daughter was born. I laughed at memories I'd forgotten and cried over words I wished I'd said. When I finished, the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full, full of love, full of gratitude, full of peace. Emma wasn't in the silence, but somehow our love was, transformed into something that could exist without her physical presence. My friend Walter, who'd been widowed 5 years earlier, had tried to prepare me for this. The silence isn't your enemy, David. It's where you learn to carry love without being crushed by loss. Discovery 3, home as self-expression. For 47 years, our house reflected us. A careful blend of Emma's love for antiques and my preference for modern simplicity. It was beautiful, harmonious, and completely negotiated. Living alone meant I could finally answer a question I'd never been asked. What would David's space look like if David got to choose everything? The transformation happened gradually. I moved Emma's china cabinet to the basement and hung my father's old jazz posters in the dining room. I converted Emma's craft room into a workshop where I could refinish furniture, a hobby I'd abandoned when we got married. I bought a massive leather reading chair that Emma would have called too masculine for the living room, but that made me feel like Ernest Hemingway. The most radical change was the kitchen. Emma had kept it pristine, everything in its place. I installed a coffee station with 4 different brewing methods and left books everywhere. Cookbooks, novels, poetry collections, so I could read while I cooked. It's not that I'm erasing Emma. I told my daughter Sarah when she visited and seemed shocked by the changes. I'm finally adding David back to the equation. Sarah looked around the transformed space and said something that surprised me. Dad, I haven't seen you this relaxed in years. It's like you're finally comfortable in your own home. Discovery 4, the archaeology of lost dreams. The letter from my 25-year-old self haunted me for weeks. That young man had so many plans. Learn guitar, write a novel, travel to Ireland, take photography classes. What had happened to those dreams? Life had happened, beautiful, demanding, all-consuming life. Marriage, children, mortgages, careers, aging parents, and finally, caregiving. Each dream had been gently set aside for something more urgent, more responsible, more necessary. But at 72, with time suddenly abundant and nobody else's needs to consider, those dreams started whispering again. I bought a guitar, a beautiful acoustic that I kept by the living room window. My fingers were stiff, my progress slow, but every chord I managed to play felt like reclaiming a piece of my younger self. I enrolled in a photography class at the community college, surrounded by students a quarter of my age who treated me like a beloved grandfather. The novel remained unwritten, but I started journaling. Long, rambling entries about rediscovering freedom, processing grief, and the strange joy of being accountable to nobody but myself. My friend Robert, 69, had his own version of this awakening after his divorce. I remembered I used to paint. He told me over coffee, not well, but with passion. Now I have a little studio in my garage, and I paint terrible landscapes that make me ridiculously happy. My ex-wife always said art was a waste of time. Turns out, waste of time was exactly what I needed. Discovery 5, time as a canvas, not a schedule. For decades, time had been the enemy, never enough of it, always racing against it, constantly dividing it between competing demands. Living alone meant time transformed from a scarce resource into an abundant gift. I could spend an entire morning reading the same chapter of a book if it moved me. I could take 3-hour walks with no destination. I could cook elaborate meals for myself, not because I was hungry, but because I enjoyed the process. The luxury of unscheduled time revealed something profound. When you're not constantly accommodating someone else's rhythm, you discover your own natural pace. I learned that I'm most creative in the early morning, most social in the afternoon, and most contemplative in the evening. For the first time in decades, I could design my days around my own energy patterns. Discovery 6, mental peace through authentic living. Something unexpected happened to my mental health. It improved dramatically, not because I was happier about being alone, but because I was no longer performing emotional stability for anyone else's benefit. For years, even in the best of marriages, there's an unconscious modulation of your moods, your needs, your reactions. You soften your frustrations, amplify your joys, and constantly consider your emotional impact on your partner's well-being. Living alone meant I could feel what I actually felt without filtering it through someone else's needs. Bad days could be bad without bringing down the household. Good days could be celebrated without worrying if someone else was struggling. Dr. Peterson, my physician, noticed the change immediately. David, your blood pressure is the best it's been in years. Your stress markers have dropped significantly. What are you doing differently? The answer was simple. I was being authentic instead of careful. Discovery 7. Relationships that choose joy. Here's the paradox nobody tells you. Living alone actually made me better at relationships, without the daily obligation of constant companionship. Every interaction became precious and intentional. My weekly dinners with my son became conversations instead of check-ins. My coffee meetings with old friends became opportunities to really listen instead of just maintaining social connections. When my granddaughter visited, we had adventures instead of just filling time together. Because I was choosing connection instead of defaulting to it, I brought more presence and joy to every encounter. People noticed. My relationships deepened in ways that surprised everyone, including me. Discovery 8. Strength through self-reliance. At 72, I learned to cook meals that actually excited me. I figured out how to fix my own plumbing. I managed my finances, organized my medical care, and handled home repairs I'd been delegating for decades. But the real discovery wasn't practical. It was psychological. Each act of self-reliance reminded me that I was still capable, still growing, still learning. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because competence at any age feels like victory. My neighbor Frank, 74, experienced something similar after his wife died. I always thought I needed someone to take care of me. He confided, turns out, I'm pretty good at taking care of myself. It's not that I don't want partnership, but now I know I don't need it to survive. Discovery 9. Joy is a daily practice. When you slow down enough to pay attention, ordinary moments become extraordinary. The way sunlight moves across your kitchen table, the satisfaction of coffee brewed exactly to your taste, the pleasure of reading the same paragraph 3 times because it moved you. These moments of simple joy had been there all along, but they'd been crowded out by the beautiful complexity of shared life. In the spaciousness of solitude, they had room to breathe. I started photographing these moments, not for anyone else, but as a way of honoring them. My refrigerator became covered with pictures of sunrise from my bedroom window, steam rising from my coffee cup, my hands holding books that had changed my perspective. The letter I'll never send. 6 months after finding that letter from my 25-year-old self, I wrote a response, one that will never be mailed, but that captures everything I've learned about the unexpected gift of living alone at 72. Dear young David, you were right about the dreams, but wrong about the timeline. The extraordinary life you hope for, it didn't happen in your 30s or 40s. It's happening now, at 72, in ways you never could have imagined. You thought adventure meant traveling the world. It actually meant learning to travel comfortably within yourself. You thought freedom meant having no responsibilities. It actually meant being responsible only to your own authentic happiness. You thought being alone meant being lonely. It actually meant being free to love yourself enough to live exactly as you choose. The man reading this has gray hair, creaking knees, and a motorcycle in his garage. He eats ice cream for breakfast sometimes and plays guitar badly, but joyfully. He's learned that the most radical thing you can do at any age is to be genuinely happy with your own company. Thank you for the reminder to dream. I'm finally living those dreams. Just 50 years later than planned, and they're even better than you imagined. Love. 72-year-old David, who is having the time of his life. The unexpected chapter. People often ask if I'm lonely, if I miss being married, if I'm looking for someone new. The answer is complicated. I miss Emma every day, but I don't miss being married to the idea of who I should be rather than who I am. I'm open to love if it finds me, but I'm no longer searching for it to complete me because I've discovered something remarkable in this quiet house, in these unscheduled days, in this life that belongs entirely to me. I'm already complete. At 72, I'm living the most authentic, joyful, adventurous chapter of my life. It's not what I planned, but it's exactly what I needed. And if a 25-year-old David could see me now, motorcycle keys in one hand, guitar pick in the other, ice cream for breakfast and jazz music filling the air, I think he'd be pretty proud of who we became. Sometimes the greatest adventure isn't finding someone to share your life with. Sometimes it's finally learning to enjoy your own company so much that sharing becomes a choice, not a necessity. That's not the end of the story. It's the beginning of the best chapter yet.